Hello. So those of you who know me know that I have a big mouth and can speak all the time. I'm actually nervous, like my hands are shaking, which shows you how special this speaker is to me and how, because I'm not nervous. So in a day before Halloween, it was October 30th at 12:49 p.m., about 12:48, I got wind that this man was going to be the keynote speaker at this conference. And I sat down at my computer 1 minute later and wrote an email to Carlos. And it just was like, Jeff Duncan-Andrade, are you kidding me? That was like the title. And then it just said, please, 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 please hire me for this conference. I am passionate about this work, and I really, 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 in all capital letters, want to meet JDA. That was the email. I didn't hear back right away. I thought maybe I scared him. He knows me, and I thought I still scared him. But here I am, and little did I know, until this morning, that I wasn't just going to get to hear him speak, but I would get to introduce him. A little bit about him. Dr. Jeff Duncan-Andrade is an associate professor of Raza Studies and Education Administration and Interdisciplinary Studies at San Francisco State University. He's also a teacher in East Oakland, and before he did all this work as a professor, he taught English at Mandela High School for 10 years, and he completed his doctorate studies at California, Berkeley. He's lectured all around. I mean, you can go on YouTube and see any of his talks, but he lectures about serving schools that serve students who are living in poverty and working class children and children of color. He works closely with schools, districts, leaders, teachers, and he's not only known here, but internationally. He's authored lots and lots of journal articles, which I have read, and book chapters on urban education and urban teacher support and development. He has 2 books, The Art of Critical Pedagogy, Possibilities for Moving from Theory to Practice in Urban Schools, which DSST we're going to read, and What a Coach Can Teach a Teacher. He's got a new book coming out on the core competencies of highly effective urban educators. And that stuff's all good, but I want to tell you why I'm so excited to introduce him. I am myself, I have grew up on the south side of Chicago. No one in my family ever went to college. No one in my community really went to college. And I didn't know it was possible at first for me. I felt the sting of savage inequalities, if you know that book back then. But I did, and I ended up going and pursuing my education and my Ph.D. And I grew up to be a big picture advisor for 4 years in a school. After that, I started to pursue anti-racist work and equity work with educators. And it wasn't until a friend sent me a video of JDA, that's what she said, here, watch this really inspiring video. And I said, okay. It was like really long, like an hour and a half. And I was like, okay, I'll watch it. And he was talking to Kip. And he was able to crystallize and articulate for me what I had experienced and what I was trying to say. It's not enough to have test score equity. In my high school where I went to school, thanks, we didn't get great educational opportunities, and we definitely didn't have the test scores. Having a school in the south side of Chicago that would have given us the test score equity, I would have had the same test scores, that would have been great, but it wouldn't have been enough. College readiness defined as test scores and GPAs is not enough until kids are prepared to deal with the racist, classist, sexist, and sexualist structures that they will face when they are in college and in the world. They are not ready for anything unless they know how to deal with the isms that are out there, even if they have really high test scores. We must not be satisfied with preparing our students to succeed in an unjust society. Instead, we need to prepare all students. That means our white, middle class, male, heterosexual, Christian students too. We must prepare them all to see, respond to, and redress injustice. And that's what you taught me in your speech that day. Do you know what these fans are called up here? Anyone? Big ass fans. I am your big ass fan. And it is my pleasure and my honor to introduce you to this group, Dr. Jeff Duncan-Andrade.
Okay, I'm going to go home and tell my wife I have a big-ass fan. First of all, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me today to share a little bit about the work that we've been doing in this city for the last 20 years. I think this is only like the second or third time, if you don't count every day that I've taught for the last 20 years, that I've done a keynote in Oakland, because I kind of feel like every day that I teach is a keynote. But so I'm really honored to be able to talk about the stuff that I'm going to talk about today in our city, a place where the conversation couldn't be more real, at least for me. And plus, I have my Warrior socks on. Okay. I'm talking about Golden State Warriors, right? And up until this year, I don't even think they sold Golden State Warrior socks. And next up is Raider socks. Okay, so just skip. Yeah, give us another 10 years, we'll be back. It's also really an honor to be in this space, in the Met West space. One, because some of the most recent national and international partnership work that we've been doing, Met West is one of those folks. And it's a trip how folks all over the country will dive into partnership with us and say, give us the keys and let us come in and really help them redesign how they get down. But in Oakland, right, despite the fact that we've got 20 years in the deck here, Cats is like hella slow to move with us, okay? But not Met West. All right, so like the whole one of the whole districts in Brooklyn was like, yo, we want to do that with you, okay? And in Oakland, right, 2 schools, right, stepped up. Not even the school that I was teaching at stepped up, right? But Met West was one of those schools. So I want to acknowledge Met West for their, this doesn't happen with big-ass fans, okay? Don't happen without real courage. And we stay on the edge in the ways in which we talk about this work, and not everybody's willing to be out there on the edge for our kids, even though we all know how out on the edge our kids have to be every day, even just to make it in the building. Okay, so I really want to respect and honor the teachers at Met West and the leadership, particularly Charlie, for their courage to really step forward and continue in the process with us to develop this work of supporting teachers and engaging families and kids. And this is the first time I've actually been in this building. Okay, so I know Met West in a very different context than y'all do. To me, like, this ain't Met West. Right? I don't even know what this is. Right? This isn't OUSD. Like, to me, Met West is grimy. Right? And I love the grimy. Right? I come from the dirt. Right? I stay in the dirt. My neighborhood is grimy, and I love it. And so I'm super appreciative that Met West has gotten access to this, because it's so long overdue. But I just caution Met West to don't lose your grimy, okay? Because once you get this, different cats start showing up, right? Different folks is interested in fucking with you now because you got this, okay? So don't, right? So when them cats come, right, make sure, right, you hang on to who you've always been, and I trust that you will. But I just want to throw that cautionary piece out there for everybody in this space as you get new buildings, right? Because very different people start showing up when you're grimy, shiny. So as we jump into the talk, I just want to, I always start with this picture because those are, this is like my reality, okay? So there's like the reality that y'all understand, okay? Of being in the schools and being on the streets and like those things, right? And then there's this reality, which is twin boys. Okay, so these are my two sons, Tayari and Amaru, and my best friend and my partner, and one of the biggest grinders on the planet, my wife. And I just want to point out that I'm holding Tayari, okay, and he has something in his mouth. And when we took the picture, right, I didn't know he had anything in his hand to be putting in his mouth. I didn't actually know until I looked at the picture. And then they were back down running around, and I'm like, what the hell does he have in his mouth? And then I run over to him, and that is bark. Okay, and he's about 14 months here. Okay, and I start with this picture because in no cliche way, right, do I say this, that this work that I'm going to talk about today is so differently and deeply impacted now that I'm a father of these boys on my block, okay? And that I'm a father of a son that eats bark, okay? And I'm trying to understand, what does that mean for me as an English teacher, okay? How do I bring in that cultural element, okay, of bark consumption? So the talk I'm going to do today is actually based on an article that I wrote for the Harvard Ed Review a few years back. And so if there's stuff that comes up that you find useful for your work, you know, there's going to be this sort of obligatory academic citations in there and some real resources that I think schools should be engaging with a higher level of intensity. Feel free to, if you can't keep up with them during the talk, feel free to Google search my name in the same title. This is actually the title of the article. And you can almost certainly get it off the Google. If for any reason that you can't, feel free to email me, and my email's right there, and I'll be happy to violate my publishing contract with Harvard and send it to you. And I know there's Harvard heads in the room right now, and like, I don't really give a shit. So I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And as the youngest, I often felt like it was my birthright to complain about pretty much everything. And I remember one time I was ranting and raving about something, and my mother stops me in the middle of my rant. And she points at the kitchen table, and she says, "Sit down." And she goes in the kitchen, and she takes a glass, and she fills it halfway with water, and she comes and she sets the glass down between us, and she says, "Half full or half empty?" And my mom's was good for those kind of trick questions where there is no right answer, so whatever answer you give is the wrong answer, and that's the lesson you need right now. And so in this particular occasion, I just kind of stared back blankly, didn't take the bait, and she says, "Son, how you choose to answer that question is how you will live your life. Because your life will always be both half full and half empty. And if you choose to see your life as half empty, if you choose to see your life for all the things that you don't have, you will never fill your cup. But if you can see your life as half full, if you can see your life for the things that you do have, you will fill your cup, it will overflow, and you can share that with others." Now, this is precisely what I think that Tupac Shakur means when he talks about the nation's most vulnerable youth as the roses that grow from concrete. Okay, now, you can come down anywhere you want on Pac. Cornel West says, "No one free of spot or wrinkle." Okay? And I agree. I think Pac deserves to be critiqued for some of the things that he said, some of the things that he did, some of the ways that he lived his life. But who doesn't? What is undeniable to me in all these hats that I wear, okay, as a community member that stays on the 3400 block of East Oakland, as a father of 2 boys, as a researcher, and as a veteran classroom teacher of over 20 years, okay, I challenge you to find anyone in late modernity that has had the reach to teach that Tupac Shakur has had. Now, when I think about Pac, okay, and all the things, okay, that he wrote, all the performances that he had, what I really wanted to try to understand is what is it about Pac's message that has been so transcendent? Because it's not hip-hop. If it was hip-hop, then Pac would be joining a whole bunch of other cats that are still on these young people's MP3 players and phones, but they're not. Right? A lot of these cats have faded out, but Pac hasn't. Pac is still in young people's ears. Truth be told, many of y'all came in this joint today bumping Pac. Okay? Many of y'all have Pac on your... Okay? 10 years ago, I started doing some work with the Maori community in New Zealand. Those of you not familiar with the indigenous politic of the globe, the Maori are the indigenous people of New Zealand. And I flew out, and look, if you put a pin on my block, I stay 3416 Davis Street. Okay, you put a pin on my block, and then you take a pin and you put it in Otara, which is the community just outside of Auckland, where I was working with the Maoris. Okay? It is literally the other side of the world. All right, so I'm not being hyperbolic here when I say I was on the other side of the world. And my first meeting is with a group of 30 high school Maori youth. Okay, so I walk in the room, they're all sitting in this circle, and this one young brother hops up and he runs up to me and he says, "You're from Oakland?" I was like, "Yeah." He says, "Did you know Tupac?" I'm like, "Nah, bro, not everybody in town knows each other like that." But it was so deep to me, right, that here I am literally across the globe, and the first question out of a young person's mouth is about Tupac. I told you I'm an English teacher, okay? 2 decades in the game. And I can tell you with full confidence that I can take a crisp, brand new $100 bill, stick that bill inside of any Shakespearean text, leave that text anywhere in my classroom, and it is completely safe. But if I leave Pac's book of poetry out, and a lot of cats don't know that Pac wrote a book of poetry, okay? And this is actually the title of the book of poetry. It's also the title of probably his best-known poem in that book. If I leave this book of poetry out anywhere in my classroom, it is immediately snatched up by the very same kids that OUSD is convinced are not interested in literacy, okay? And what I have told principals, superintendents, and literally Arnie Duncan to their face, okay, is that it's not that young people aren't interested in literacy. It's that they're not interested in the literacy that we are giving them. Okay? Those are two very different problems, and how you frame the problem in your head drives the way in which you craft your response and solution to it. Okay? And so Pac, for me, right, is so telling, okay, about how I think about what are the problems that I have to grapple with, okay, to really support and develop the young people in my community. Okay? Now, as a way to kind of frame up the talk that I'm going to do today, I'm actually going to play Pac reading this poem. Now, Pac actually read this poem on multiple tracks. Okay, the one that is probably the best known is a song called "Mama's Just a Little Girl." Right? And at the end of that song, he actually reads the content of this poem over the beat of the song. So I'm going to play that for us right now as a way to frame up the rest of this talk.
We turn from bad to worse. It's to ignore from which we came. Mama's just a little girl. You wouldn't ask why the rose that grew from the concrete had damaged petals. On the contrary, we would all celebrate its tenacity. We would all love its will to reach the sun. Well, we are the roses. We are the roses. This is the concrete. This is the concrete. And these are my damaged petals. These are my damaged petals. Don't ask me why. Don't ask why. Thank God. Thank God. Ask me how.
Now, when I think about Pac's message here, what Pac is pointing out is how absurd it would be for you and the homie to be walking down the street and you see a rose growing in the concrete. You say, "Look, a rose in the concrete." And the homie turns back to you and says, "Yeah, but what a shame. It has damaged petals." Of course it has damaged petals, fool. It's growing in concrete. But we do this all the time with young people. I have damaged petals. I wear them in ink on my arms. So that every day when I wake up in the morning and I see myself in the mirror, I'm reminded of who I am and where I come from. But school taught me that that ink was my problem. School taught me that if I could just leave that ink at the door, I would be so much more successful. I'd be so much easier to teach. I'd be so much more valuable to them and their system and their process. But you see, the problem is that you can't take the ink off your arms. Once the ink is on your arms, it's on your arms. And what Pac says to me, what Pac says to young people in my community that have ink on their arms, is that I see you. And it is that ink that gives you your tenacity and your will to reach the sun. You must keep that ink on your arms, because that is what will get you through this fucked up system that we've created for you. Don't peel the ink off. Don't leave the ink at the door. Be presente. Bring it with you. Put it on the table so that we can all learn from that ink. I don't ignore your damaged petals. I acknowledge that it is your damaged petals that make you such a beautiful, tenacious rose. That is precisely what my mother said to me. So I can listen to my mother, or I can listen to Pac, because the message is the same. Every time we see young people simply for their damaged petals, and they do have damaged petals, that's real talk. Every time we see young people as a glass half empty, they never fill up. Everyone in this room is a glass half full, half empty. And you know as well as I do that when you are around people who see you as a glass half empty, who see you for all that you can't do, all the skills that you lack, you don't work hard to spend time with them cats. Okay? You punch in and punch out. And the only reason you punch in at all is because your paycheck depends on it. And then you got people in your life that see you as a glass half full. They acknowledge that you can't do everything. They acknowledge that there's some skill development necessary. But every time they interact with you, they make you bloom. They make you feel like you have value, like you are a serious contributor to the conversation. That person, you don't punch a clock on. That person, you don't say, well, my contract's up at 3:30, right? You put in mad, crazy hours. When that person calls and says, I need you on Saturday, I need you on Sunday, you're like, you got it. Okay? Kids are no different. Right? When the process begins with kids about what they don't have and all this shit that we're going to give to them so that they can be so much more valuable to the world, the volume goes to zero. But when the starting point is asset-based, when the starting is, damn, I love you for your tenacity and your will to reach the sun. Now let's get to work on healing some of those damaged petals. Those are the spaces, the places, and the people that young people willingly invest in, that they will run through walls for. Okay? Now, in order to do this, we do have to be attentive to Pac's point about damaged petals. And our field is way behind the curve in terms of understanding what are causal, what are the things that are causal of damaged petals in our roses, and what is the impact of those damaged petals in their ability to come into our systems and actually engage in the way that we need them and want them to. Of all the stuff I've read, all the experts I've met with, all the lectures I've been to, nothing has more profoundly impacted my day-to-day classroom practice than this film series. It is a 6-part film series from PBS called Unnatural Causes. It has an amazing website, tons of resources for teachers. I know kindergarten teachers who use this in their class, all the way up to senior high school teachers. Okay. Now, Unnatural Causes is actually a global study by the world's leading experts across fields. So public health, social epidemiology, the medical field, neuroscience, all teamed up to study the impact of inequality at the community level, at the nation-state level, and at the global level. So it is literally a global study of this question. Is inequality making us sick? Short answer, yes. Widely agreed upon across fields. The biggest threat to health on the planet is inequality. That's why you're so important. Because to the degree that your space, whether we're talking about a classroom space, a program space, a building space, or a community space, to the degree that your space is all about interrupting inequality, you are actually elevating health outcomes, right? Which we are never measured on, even though all the research suggests that education is one of the biggest contributors to poor health or good health. Okay? A whole new funding source, Arnie, that you should be tapping us into, since we're doing the work of medical doctors before they even get to medical doctors, if they even get to medical doctors. Okay? I told him that, he didn't like that much. So, look, I don't know your community. Okay? I know my community. So I can't tell you which of these elements of the concrete are the most significant in your students' lives. The bullets here are some that I have pulled out that there is really compelling research on that are clearly impacting the lives of the nation's most vulnerable youth at different levels, depending on what's going on in your community. So the start point for every educator should be to become an ethnographer of the community where the students come from that you serve. Okay? What are the tiers of the concrete? Now, the truth about concrete is it is perhaps the worst environment in which you can attempt to grow. It is devoid of light. It lacks key nutrients. And on top of all that, okay, it's toxic. Right? So these layers layer your students' lives. Right? The degree to which they do and the order of operations really varies widely depending on communities. Okay? So I'm going to take you for a bit of a deep dive into the community that you're actually in right now, okay, which is our community. And it is clear, okay, that at front and center for us, okay, is violence. Okay? Oakland has the dubious honor over the last 20 years, okay, of always being one of the 5 most violent cities in the country. Okay? And we typically duke it out with the D, Southside Chicago, Baltimore, D.C., right? These are the sort of, right, notorious hoods, right, and elements of L.A. as well. Okay, and other folks sneak in and sneak out, but Oakland just steady stays there, right, in the top 5. And in fact, right, folks have become so concerned about homicide in Oakland that they start mapping it. So in 2006, the San Francisco Chronicle called it so concerned with homicide in our city that they created this map. And they said that we have the plague, which I find interesting because, as I told y'all, I live in a 3,400 block, so I live right about there. Okay. So if we had the plague, guess what? Y'all would be in trouble. Because the plague's the ultimate non-discriminator, isn't it? It doesn't recognize race. It doesn't recognize class. It doesn't recognize gender. Sure as hell doesn't recognize political boundaries, but those red lines that just popped up are the political boundaries of our city. And as you can see, our plague has been almost perfectly quarantined between the 580 and the 880 freeways, what we call the flatlands or the lower bottoms. And you don't got to be a topographical genius looking at a map of our city to see the outlier. What is it? Piedmont. Now, what the hell is going on in Piedmont where they can completely opt out of the plague? Cornel West jokes, Disneyland brags that nobody's ever died on their premises. He says somebody probably has. They just push them across the line to keep their record clean. Okay? I think that's what happened right there. That shit was probably in Piedmont. They're like, oh, hell no. Give that back to Oakland. We don't have homicide in Piedmont. Not acceptable. We just put that back in Oakland's digits. 5 years, we had 555 homicides. City of a little over 400,000 people. 2007, the Chronicle gave up. They gave 1 year. Said, map's not that important anymore. So the Oakland Tribune took over. Now every year, the Oakland Tribune on the front page, once a year, publishes the homicide map. Names, faces, places. Everybody murdered in our city. These are 4 of the most recent ones. And as you can see, there's been almost no stemming of the tide. So I decided that I would update the homicide map. And I'm going to do that for 13 years. Because that's how many years young people are actually in public schools in this city. This young person is in 9th grade. They are just walking into Met West. And you tell me, where can a young person live, my sons included, where do they not personally witness homicide, if not multiple homicides? My sons aren't even 2. They turn 2 at the end of the month, and they've already seen a cat get dropped on our block. And yet, the conversation in school is about what? Common Core, no child left behind, college-going culture, A through G, okay? All of which are important. Okay? You can look at my track record. It is very well documented. I am super committed to getting those outcomes for kids. But for me, the question is always about how and for what. For what do you want kids to have A through G? For what do you want kids to go to college? And how are you going to do that? And in what context? Are you going to completely ignore this? Are you going to act as though this isn't actually walking into your building every day because of how fucking inconvenient it is to actually have to talk about homicide when it's so much more convenient just to focus on the autobiography of Malcolm X and believe that that's going to somehow be curative and healing for kids that are then going back into that? Or are we actually going to be an institution that addresses the material conditions of kids' lives, that actually gets a jackhammer out and starts drilling down in the concrete? And in fact, what pisses me off so much is that we know better. That we have hard evidence that that is not how you respond to this reality in kids' lives. I'll give you one of many examples: Columbine. Because when this happens in a wealthy white community, the response the next day is fundamentally different. Best believe the next day those kids started coming back into Columbine High, not a peep came out of a teacher's mouth or a principal's mouth about you forgot your backpack again, you didn't do your homework again. When are you going to get serious about college? Because that would be absurd to talk to a wealthy white child who just experienced that in that way. Not only would it be absurd, it's a fireable offense. But we do it every day with black and brown babies and poor white babies. And let's not act like this is just a black and brown problem. Go to the Appalachians where there's multi-generational entrenched white poverty and you see the same bullshit. Absolutely ignoring the reality of the concrete under the auspices that we're committed to creating equal outcomes for all kids. Okay? Talk that shit to Columbine. Okay, and see how long they let you hold the mic. Okay? The truth of the matter is that we built a nation state where the lives of some babies matter more than the lives of others. Okay? And you can do this map for your city. It doesn't have to be you might be thinking, well, we don't have homicide like that in San Diego. Okay? Well, A, that depends on how you draw your map. Okay? Because if we go to Southeast, okay, we're going to see the same stuff popping off. If you go to La Jolla, okay, you're right. Okay? Right, they Piedmont. You said it. Okay? I just echoed you. I didn't say it. Don't get mad at me, UCSD. Okay? So, my point is that it's not just homicide, right? This is the work you have to do in your community. And that's the value of technology. GIS mapping will let you start putting these maps together for your schools, for your teachers, for your training, for your development, for your recruitment, to start mapping out, well, what are the social toxins that are stacking in our kids' lives? Because it won't just be homicide. It could be homelessness. It could be police brutality. It could be ICE raids. It could be immigration status. It could be lack of access to jobs. It could be lack of access to healthy foods. Y'all know the list goes on and on and on. If you don't really understand at a deep level what those material conditions are, you can't really serve kids. So you will make that shit up. And you will draw up stuff on a whiteboard that looks hella cool and is definitely going to work because everything fucking works on the whiteboard. And then you will deal with me. Okay? And you won't deal with me. You'll do what teachers always did with me. You'll send me to a higher authority. Okay? You'll send me to somebody whose job it is to deal with cats like me. Okay? And the minute you do that, I don't trust you. Because I know you don't actually want to deal with what's going on my block. Okay? You want numbers. Okay? And you want me to be a convenient contributor to those numbers. Okay? Look, y'all, every kid you serve knows this map because they live it. And when they walk in, okay, and your classroom and your school and your program are not taking this head on, okay, they know that you don't really want to deal with the most pressing issues in their life. Okay? And that, by default, it is a biological fact. Okay? Or you can just read Herb Cole, okay, who said, kids don't care what you know until they know that you care. Right? That is a statement of common sense. It is also, okay, supported by the most rigorous medical research. Okay? That is a biological fact. You cannot invest closely in someone that you don't believe cares about you. Okay? That is the one thing our kids know very, very well. Okay? How to protect the last vestiges of their mind. Because that's all they got left. Now, the reason, okay, that this biology, okay, impacts you in this way, okay, is because of how PTSD operates in the body. Now, y'all know that exposure to that kind of toxic stress causes PTSD, right? Most folks are familiar with the term, but the problem with the conversation about PTSD is it's mostly focused on this dude, which is right because soldiers are particularly prone to PTSD. Okay? But nobody's talking about these brothers. These are my students. This is me on the camera. This is us burying another one of my students. A 16-year-old stabbed more than a dozen times in the face with a screwdriver about 3 blocks from my house. And this is who buried him. The next day, we all went back to school. And the conversation continued as though this never even happened. And the school thought they were doing some shit because they set up an altar where kids can come by and like write a card, and right. But in the classroom, it was like, no. You got your exit exam coming up. You should know Casey. It's so important. And then these kids are having to square that round hole, and it doesn't square. That trumps my Casey exam until you deal with that. Now, the medical research is clear on this, right? And there is a growing body of resources for educators that are operating in these kinds of contexts. The best that I've seen out there in print is this book. It's written by the nation's leading expert on child trauma, a dude named Bruce Perry. Okay, Bruce has a lot of stuff out there. The most accessible thing that I've seen for teachers is this book, The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And Bruce covers a lot of ground in the book. Every chapter is actually about a kid who had experienced high levels of trauma that he actually worked with. Okay? And he speaks directly to teachers in every chapter because the teachers are often the front line institutionally, okay, that are experiencing the manifestation of trauma, and that we have virtually no training on how to respond. All we have is these institutional modes of punishment. Okay? We don't actually know how to treat trauma, how to respond to trauma, okay? How to be caring in those moments. Now, Bruce raises a lot of really interesting challenges, okay? And at some level, even indictments of schools and how we've operated in these communities. Right? One of the most compelling ones, okay, is the data around trauma. Okay? What the national body of research in child trauma reveals is that 1 in 3 urban youth, 1 in 3, y'all, display the symptoms of mild to severe PTSD. If I told you that 33%, minimum 33%, of your school's population had X, would you develop an initiative to address it? Okay. So if you don't have an initiative to address PTSD, okay, you're not data-driven. Okay? We always talk about being data-driven. Okay? All this bullshit about being data-driven. You know what? I'm cool with being data-driven. I want to be data-driven. The problem is that we're looking at all the wrong data. And so when you look at the wrong data, you develop the wrong initiatives, and then we all get confused about why these outcomes seem intractable. Okay? They're not intractable if you start looking at the right data. Because when you start looking at different data, then the responses you come up with become very, very different. Now, When they compared this to the Pentagon's data for soldiers returning from live combat, what they found is that urban youth are actually twice as likely to have PTSD than a soldier returning from a combat zone. And the whole nation is concerned with addressing PTSD in soldiers returning from combat, because we're acknowledging that the integration of those people back into our society is extremely difficult and extremely dangerous. But the data suggests that we should be twice as concerned for the young people in our community, and how the fuck are we going to integrate them into our society if we don't have similar... We haven't even figured out with soldiers. And they're twice as likely, and on top of all that, in 2011, Harvard School of Public Health says, actually, kids don't have PTSD. Because PTSD stands for what? Post-traumatic stress, which is accurate for a soldier because a soldier leaves the battlefield, but what about young people? Right. They're going back to it time and again. And so in 2011, Harvard School of Public Health releases a completely new diagnosis to capture the complexity that they're seeing in young people exposed to ongoing trauma that they call CPTSD. So this is an entirely new diagnosis, only been around for 2 years, because they're finding that young people, what's going on in their brains and their bodies is even more complex than what we see when a soldier has reintegrated from live combat. It's that deep, y'all. And we are not talking about this in schools. We're talking about fucking Common Core. Gotta address this if we're going to Common Core anybody. This, hey, is the Common Core, hey, of the reality of way too many kids, hey, in this nation. Now here's why it matters. Okay? Because I don't want you to just talk shit. Okay? I get to do that. Right? You are going to actually have to have data. Okay? And the cool thing is there's tons of data coming out of the medical community about why this matters and about why, if you don't address it, you're just playing games. And the reason is because according to David Williams at Harvard School of Public Health, the biggest threat to health is the accumulation of multiple negative stressors without the resources to cope. That's your money piece. Every kid that is struggling to engage in your school right now does not need more tutoring. They don't need a fucking mentor. Okay? If a kid is struggling to engage, right, I promise you, if you do the work, you will find this calculus. This kid is stacking negative stressors in their life. Okay? They got violence, they got homelessness, they got food insecurity, they got all the stressors. Okay? They're stacking, and they have no resources to cope with it. Right? So the stressors are just bearing down on them, and the reason that this matters so much is because it increases your allostatic load. Everyone in this room should know what allostatic load is, because it operates in your body too. Okay? And if you begin to understand how allostatic load operates in the body, you can respond very differently to kids who have elevated allostatic loads because you can read the signs. Now, this is straight out of a medical journal. Okay? And this is literally a mapping in the body of what happens when stress hits you. On the top, this top graph, okay, is actually a normal stress event. Right? So I just want to be clear with everybody in this room. Right? I am not, nor will I ever advocate that anyone seeks to live a stress-free life. There is only one group of people on the planet that lives a stress-free life. Dead people. Okay? So do not aim to live a stress-free life. Stress is a normal part of the human condition. It is actually good for your body under normal conditions. Okay? And so under normal conditions, this is what it looks like in your body. Okay? A stress event hits you, okay? And then on the x-axis, what you see is the medical term activity. Okay? This is activity that is happening inside of your body as a result of your SRS, your stress response system. It is the most sophisticated response system in your body because it is at the core of survival. So On the y-axis, what you see is the physiological response, okay? Excuse me, the x-axis is time, okay? And on the y-axis is this uptick in physiological activity, okay? And this is, so when a stress event, right, hits you, right, what starts to happen to your chest? Right, your heart beats faster, okay? And so you will be familiar with some of the chemicals that rush through your body, one of them known as adrenaline. Right? The one that the medical field is most concerned with is a chemical called cortisol. Because the medical field has been able to directly link the overproduction of cortisol to the big 4 unnatural killers that are plaguing this society right now. Cancer, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension have all been directly linked to the overproduction of cortisol. And what causes the overproduction of cortisol? Nope, not stress. Stress causes the production of cortisol. What causes the overproduction of cortisol? Toxic stress. Okay? So what we're looking at here, okay, is production of cortisol, but not at a toxic level. Okay, so I'll give you an example about how this operates in your body. Normal stress event. Okay? So I'll give you the story of when I first asked my wife out. Highly stressful. It's hilarious because Cass asks my wife all the time, like, don't you ever stress out? Like, he travels all over the world and he's staying in hotels. He's meeting all these single people. And she goes, no. And I'm like, well, why not? She says, because he has no game. And this is completely and totally true, okay? So my no game ass is over here, right, in the corner, trying to think about, like, what am I going to say to this amazing woman, and so I'm literally saying stuff to myself like, your mom says you're handsome, your mom says you're handsome, your mom says you're handsome. Pumping myself up, and I start walking across the room, go talk to her, and what is going on inside my chest? Right, it's pounding, right? And the other things, the other signs that you can outwardly recognize is when people are experiencing stress moments, right, is their jawline tightens, their forearms tighten, okay? So all this is happening for me, right, as I'm walking across the room, and I get up the nerve to talk to her, and I said some stupid shit, and she says back to me, no, you cannot have my number, but I'll take yours. And I'm like, okay, so it's for all the folks in the room, right, trying to get your game on tonight. I just want to give you a little insight. If you were a no-game person like me, I thought that was a winner. Come to find out that that's actually the brush-off. Okay, I'm just saying, okay? So I give her my number, right, and I'm walking away, right? And what's going on inside my chest? Back to normal? Okay, right. Key word there, slowly, right? The medical field refers to this as the recovery period, right? And you can see the slope, so it's not, bam, your heart's back to normal, stress event is over, right? It's a slow, steady decline where those chemicals recede back to their normal levels. That is good for you. That is normal, okay? That is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is these bottom 4 graphs, which look completely different. But those are graphs of toxic stress exposure. Okay? Now, the one I like to joke with high school teachers about is this one, okay? Because for high school kids, it's kind of like this. First period, second period, third period, fourth period. Okay? And for all the principals in the room, for high school teachers, it's kind of like this. First period, second period, third period. Now, what do you notice about the graph on that one versus the top graph? What do you notice about the slope? It's steep. On which side? That's what kills you. That's what makes it toxic. It is a radical increase of those chemicals in your body with no recovery period because you're bouncing stressor to stressor to stressor. This is why multiple negative stressors toxify your body. Okay? And that can ultimately lead to maladaptation. Okay? Then it can lead to prolonged response. This is the kid who is hypervigilant. You know, that kid who is just on edge, right? Amped up all the time. Okay? He's in the third space. She's in the third space, right? And then that can ultimately lead to the last one, okay, which is what the medical field refers to as inadequate response. This is the kid who can witness violence and be deadpan. Just cannot muster, right, a reaction anymore. And the reason they can't muster a reaction anymore is because their stress response system is exhausted. It has been on high alert for so long that they just can't muster a response. This is the kid that falls asleep in class. They don't fall asleep in class because they've been on the phone all night with their girlfriend or their boyfriend. That could be the case, and this is why you knowing your students is so important, and that's the kid you smack in the back of the head and be like, dude, stay off the phone at night. Okay? But it could be very likely, okay, in fact, a 1 in 3 chance if you're in an urban community, that that kid is actually asleep because his or her body demanded it. They said, this is the only time that you're going to have safe space to sleep. You're taking it now because sleep is imperative to survival. And it's not a choice. They're not choosing to sleep in your class. Okay? They're sleeping in your class because their body is demanding it from them. Those are two, right, the same situation. This is why us knowing how to read the signs is so important, because the response must be driven by the reality, okay? Not by the convenience of our classroom or our school needs. The reason that this is toxic, okay, and the reason that this is so challenging for us, okay, as educators, is that it's all happening inside the body. Okay? So you can't, kids are not going to come to class with a little digital readout that says, today my allostatic load is a 7.6, so back the off. Okay? That'd be dope, by the way, if any of you are, innovators, like if you create that, like you could build schools forever, because every school would buy that. Okay? But that's not going to happen. Okay? So in the interim, right, we have to understand what is actually happening to their bodies and their brains. The best research on this that I've seen actually comes from a professor at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, in the School of Public Health. Her name is Arlene Geronimus. Now, you can go out, and Arlene is, top in the field and has written an incredible number of really compelling studies that do all this statistical analysis that I don't even pretend to understand. So you can go and read all that, or you can just pick up this issue of Miller McCune, which is free. Okay? And you can download it online, and this issue of Miller McCune actually has an amazing summary of decades of her work, and it is very accessible to everyday folk. Okay? And in this piece, they talk about this concept, right, that she has used to describe what she sees in her research. Now, what I love about Arlene's work, a lot of my colleagues in research, right, they try to isolate causals, right? So they're like, let me see how race impacts stress levels, or let me see how gender impacts stress levels, or let me see how poverty impacts stress levels. And what Arlene has more of an ethnic studies approach. Okay, so ethnic studies is interdisciplinary. Ethnic studies, right, understands the concept of intersectionality. Right? And what Arlene says is that that's not actually how the world works. The world is an intersection of multiple negative stressors. So I got to understand what happens in the lives of people who are stacking stressors. So she does a longitudinal study on the lives of poor black women. So she captures 3 constant stressors: race, class, gender. And what she found in these women's bodies is that they were literally weathered from the inside out. They were literally deteriorating from the inside out because of the toxicity of the multiple stressors in their lives. Now, the way I describe Arlene's concept of weathering is it's like if you're poor and or a person of color, you are born into this country in a fight. You don't want to be in a fight. You want peace. Okay? But if you've ever been in a fight before, and I'm talking about like you can't weasel your way out of it. This shit is going to hop off. You're going to have to chuck them, or you ain't getting out of that corner. So you get your hands up, right, and you're going to have to, what do you protect? You protect your face, because that's where the quitters happen. And you try to get as much of your lower torso in there as you can, but the face is your primary place of protection. Okay? But you ain't fighting Mike Tyson. Because if you were fighting Mike Tyson, what would happen? Okay. Somebody said you get your ear bit. All right. And then you get knocked out. Okay.
Right. Okay? But you ain't fighting Mike Tyson. You're fighting a pure pugilist, a master of the sweet science. So you come out and you square up and you get your hands up around your head. Where do they go to work? Okay? They go to work on the body, but that's all right because you work out at 24 or whatever gym you tell yourself you work out at, okay? And you got your little 6-pack, 8-pack, 12-pack, whatever you lie to yourself about. So you can take body blow after body blow after body blow because the body, these kids' bodies, our bodies are so incredibly resilient. So they're taking stressor after stressor after stressor. This is their tenacity and their will to reach the sun. They keep coming. They keep coming to school. Even though all this stuff is stacking on them, they keep coming. They keep coming. Sociologists refer to these as microaggressions. And the problem with the conversation about race and poverty and patriarchy and heteronormativity and all these other threats, okay, to our health are that we talk about them as though they're these mega events in our life. Some white person on a white horse wearing white sheets and a white hood shows up and lights a white cross on fire on your lawn. And everybody's like, that's some racist shit. Okay? And indeed it is, and let's not pretend that doesn't still happen in certain places in this country, because it does. Okay? But racism and poverty and patriarchy and homophobia, they don't operate like that in this society so much anymore. They're in the walls. They're in the fabric. They're in basic human interactions. They're in you're walking down the street every damn day in your neighborhood and one time rolls by a little slower and they drop the window and the squelch of the radio comes off, or you're in New York City, you get a stop and frisk. And it's not once, it's over and over and over, or you're a woman and every single time you go to your car, you have to look over your shoulder because shit just ain't safe in here anymore. Or you're a black man standing in an elevator and cats walk up and go, oh, that's all right, I'll get the next one. And the door's closed and you look around and you're like, what the fuck? I'm the only person in here. Right? And by themselves, any one of those incidents, not a killer. Not a killer. But it's body blow after body blow after body blow. It's 5, 6, 7. It's you write the best essay of your life and the teacher says, this is amazing. Did you write this? You're so articulate for a Hispanic. And as those stack and stack and stack, and you take body blow after body blow after body blow in this fight, what eventually happens to your hands? They come down, and then what happens? Okay? And then you get cancer, and then you get type 2 diabetes, and you get hypertension, and then you get heart disease. That's how stress operates in the body. That's why us addressing it, interrupting it, teaching kids how to de-escalate, right? How to heal, how to respond is literally life and death. The work that you guys do every day is life and death. And no one in this country is seeing us in that way except researchers. That's why us also shifting the conversation about data is so important. Forcing the field to change the data we're looking at so we understand what is our actual value to this society and how does the way in which we're treated, respected, developed, trained, supported in this society begin to reflect what the research actually suggests. Because right now, the two don't line up. Most people feeling like this right now, looking around. Who organized this damn conference? Brought this dude. Okay, I'm trying to come back, have some positive vibe. Okay, well, welcome to Oakland. We grimy all day, every day. Okay, right. Even in your fancy new building, right? Right? We were still 4 and 12 this year. Shit. My mother's 86 years old, and she has recently discovered email, which means that I get updates on Jesus every day. I know when he's risen, I know when he's dead, I know when there's 2 sets of footprints in the sand, and then suddenly there's only one, and I know what my role is in that. All my Catholic brethren laughing right now. My brother found out that I did this talk at Harvard, and it was me and Arnie Duncan. And Arnie went first. Yeah, sucker. Then I came on and explained why everything he just said was wrong. And so Harvard made a big deal of it, and they, did some high-res video production and threw it on YouTube. And so my brother snatches the YouTube link and emails it to my mom. And Mom's calls me up and was like, "Yeah, your brother just sent me the YouTube link to your Harvard talk. I'm gonna go on and watch it, and I'm gonna call you back and let you know what I think." I'm like, "All right, cool, Ma." So about 90 minutes later, Mom calls me back, and I'm like, "So what'd you think?" She says, "I think you curse too much." The good thing about my mom, she does not text message. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. It's not important. Okay? What is important is that we're not screwed at all. Okay? The other side of the research, okay, is actually crystal clear on what responses matter most in the context that I have just laid out. In fact, the research couldn't be more clear. The researchers have gone so far as to say that the research is conclusive. That the single biggest protective factor in the lives of young people that are experiencing toxic stress is, she said relationships, otherwise, what else, what do you think? Biggest protective factor. Safe environment. Adults, safe environment, okay. Teachers. No. Okay. Actually, the research suggests that adults are major contributors to the stress of children. Okay. Teachers at or near the top of that list. Okay. Safe spaces, yes, but safe spaces, okay, oftentimes aren't safe spaces. Okay. We be thinking they're safe because they're safe for us. Like, we got this safe space for gay kids. All right, where you can come talk about being gay. And then we don't do shit about the playground, or the lunchroom, or the locker room, because we have safe space for gay kids. The research is clear. The biggest protective factor in the lives of young people experiencing toxic stress is a caring adult. That care piece, kind of important to add on to adult. Okay, just the fact that you've grown don't mean you're a protective factor. Now, what's really interesting to me about the research is what it doesn't say. It does not say a caring, licensed adult. There's actually no research which connects licensure, okay, with care. And so this is important for those of you in school buildings, because what the research suggests is that you cannot control who that adult will be. It might be the custodian. It might be the crossing guard. It might be the person that serves lunch. It might be the school secretary. It might be the English teacher. So everyone has to be on deck for PD. Everyone has to understand that a building culture is defined by all of the people in the building, not just the people with certain licenses. Okay? That's the work that has to shift in schools. We're all on deck for kids all the time. That has to be normed, because we can't control which adult that kid gravitates to. And when it happens, you gotta be ready. You gotta know the signs, and you gotta be on deck to really support and care about that kid, because you're the critical moment in healing at that time. Now, why? Why does a caring adult matter so much? Okay? The reason is that the medical field has been able to directly link hope levels, a child's hope level, to the number of caring adults that they have in their life. And hope is the only thing that the medical field has measured to date, okay, that actually shows a real ratio impact on stress. The higher your hope, the better you are able to manage your stress levels. The lower your hope, the more hopeless you are, the more toxic stress becomes in your life. Okay? Now, I told you I'm an English teacher, so I like the word hope. Because if you look it up in a dictionary, you'll find it's both a noun and a verb. As I said, it's popping up more and more in the research. These are two of my favorites. One is from psychology, a dude named Charles Snyder. He developed something called hope theory, and he actually has a massive number of studies measuring hope in young people using something he calls the Children's Hope Scale. I actually use the Children's Hope Scale in my high school class to baseline hope levels when kids first contact our program, and then to measure change over time in hope, okay, as they stay with our program. My favorite definition of hope actually comes from a social epidemiologist who's not far from here. His name's Lynn Syme. He's a presidential professor in UC Berkeley School of Public Health. He defines hope as a sense of control of destiny. Now, I don't know why y'all got into this gig, but that's why I got into this gig. Because I wanted kids to have a greater sense of control of destiny in my neighborhood. Now, the truth is, in 22 years in this city, I have never once been measured on my ability to raise hope. Even though all the research suggests that that's why I've been so successful in my class, is because I focus on hope. Okay? And I know that if I get the hope levels up, the GPA, the homework, the engagement, the AP classes, the college going, those start to take care of themselves. Now, the more I've done this research, the more I realize that I'm not onto anything new. All I'm doing is channeling the best of my ancestors. And the truth is, okay, that this field has become so technocratic, okay, that we have become deaf in the ears to the teachings of the ancestors, the best of the teaching of the ancestors. And the truth is that this country is profoundly ahistorical. Okay? We act as though it all began in 1776. Okay? Most people in this room can't actually name their indigenous land, their indigenous language, their indigenous culture. We've lost track of that, but I promise you that I don't care where you come from, I don't care who you are, if you track back to your first ancestor, real indigeneity, you will find the same thing that I find when I track back to my ancestors. My people are from the Mayan and the Mexica. And the Mayan taught all their children one core principle, and that is known as In Lakesh. Now, In Lakesh became highly popularized in this nation state because of the recent work of the Raza Studies program in Tucson Unified. Okay? And I don't know how many of you keep up, right, with HuffPost and some of the most recent public, right, narrative around this, but this In Lakesh, the state of Arizona just outlawed it. You cannot teach In Lakesh in public schools anymore. I can't make this shit up. I dare you to even try make something like that up. But you can Google search it. HuffPost just released an article about it. Okay? In Lakesh is the story of the smoking mirror. We taught all our children that every living being you come across is a smoking mirror. That's not the question. The question is whether or not you are going to muster the courage, character, and commitment to clear the smoke away. Because if you do, what will you see? You will see yourself. And it's so much harder to do harm when you are looking at yourself. Now, I've been teaching a long, long time, y'all. And there's times when there is way more smoke between me and a kid than other times. And there's times when I can actually name where that smoke came from. Okay? But that's not the question. The question is, in that moment, will I find the courage, character, and commitment to clear the smoke away and find myself in that child? And the truth is, the more smoke, the more they need me. The more smoke, the harder the work to find myself in that child. It's easy when you walk up to the mirror and it's like, oh, damn, you look just like me. It's easy for me to do with my own sons. Okay? But as Lisa Delpit points out, okay, as long as we continue to see the kids that we teach as other people's children, the smoke will blur the lines. Okay? These are not other people's children. Okay? This is your son. This is your daughter. Can you find yourself in those kids that give you homicidal thoughts? I'm just keeping it real, okay? The way that we try to do that in this city, okay, in our work, in my community, is by developing what I call critical hope. Critical hope has, it's the sort of holy trinity of hope, okay? 3 components to it. The first is what I call material hope. This is, first and foremost, just be badass at what you do. Hold your post. Okay? If you are school secretary, then be the dopest, baddest school secretary on the planet. Okay? If you are English literature teacher, then do that thing. Okay? If you are an administrator, then do that thing. But be the baddest on the planet, because that alone, just you holding your post in that way, is a huge material resource in our community. Because a lot of cats are not holding their post right now. They're falling down on the job. Okay? And kids are the ones that ultimately pay the cost for that. But that won't be enough. You're going to have to supplement being really good at what you do with real material resources. You got to pay attention. Who's the kid that comes to class in pouring rain with a damn t-shirt on? And give up your umbrella. Give up your dope-ass new North Face coat that you got for Christmas. Okay? Real material resources save lives. Okay? Don't hog your foot-long subway. Okay? It's already cut in half. Right? When you, I hog it all the time. Fuck that, I never get to eat, right? I'm going to eat today. When you do this, okay, this is what closes the gap between students' most pressing needs and what we actually offer them in school. Okay? But here's what pisses me off, is that we've known this since 1943. Okay? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, widely agreed upon across, but this is how I know we ain't data-driven. I mean, I challenge you to find something that has 60 years legacy agreed upon across fields in the research community. Okay? And Maslow is crystal clear that if food, clothing, shelter, and safety are unstable, then you cannot find stability in love and belonging. And if love and belonging are unstable, then you cannot find stability in esteem. But the trip to me about Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the pinnacle. Because the most successful kids self-actualize, don't they? The kids who take what you give them and then go one step further. That's the kid everybody wants in their class. Well, the trip about the research is that self-actualization is actually the natural human condition. You don't have to do anything to people to get them to self-actualize. So if you have a kid who's not self-actualizing, then they are outside of their natural human state. That's why unnatural causes is called unnatural causes. It is not natural for a kid to not self-actualize. So if they are not, the beauty of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is it tells you exactly what to address. If they are not self-actualizing, start at the bottom. Are they hungry? Do they have inadequate clothing? Do they feel physically, emotionally, spiritually unsafe? Do they lack housing? If you cannot address that, you will never get long-term academic engagement. It's a biological fact. They can't distribute resources to your biology homework if they are hungry. They can't. Their body won't let them. They can dip into your homework, but when that hunger starts kicking in, they'll pull back. They will not be fully present. If you get all that right, okay, then do kids feel loved in your building? Do they feel a real sense of belonging in your building? And then if you get that right, okay, have you actually addressed knowledge as self? Are you really doing the work of an ethnic studies community responsive paradigm? So many of our kids are taught to hate themselves. We're taught to hate our hair texture, taught to hate the color of our skin, the color of our eyes, the language that our parents speak, the neighborhood that we're from, the way in which we dress, who our parents are, the absence of our parents. Okay? And that lack of self-love, okay, is a huge barrier to kids becoming who they really are, just as human beings. Second is what I call Socratic hope. Okay? This is a term I borrowed from Cornel West. Right? And what West points out is the truly Socratic person understands, okay, that it is more important that you show the sermon than preach the sermon. Schools are quick to preach to kids, right? But they don't even themselves live the life, model the very behaviors that they're asking from kids. I went into school buildings all the time where adults just straight up don't like each other and aren't afraid to put it out there, walk past each other and just code ass shoulder. And all the kids are around and be like, then I guess that's cool. Because that's what's modeled for me in this space. It is acceptable, right, to not love and respect each other. But in buildings that I'm in where the adults love each other, they acknowledge birthdays, children, struggles in their life, hugs are regularly exchanged. The youth culture is fundamentally different. Youth culture is a reflection of the adult culture. No school in this building has a youth culture problem. If you think you got a youth culture problem, what you really got is an adult culture problem. Okay? If you go to work on that, okay, then the youth culture tends to come along. And the reason for this is because it's the difference between a culture where teachers are liked and a culture where teachers are loved. And the problem with this conversation in this country is that we have a Pollyannish definition about love. Okay? Love in this country, the definition of love is based on the Notebook. Okay? Where everything just works out in the end. Okay? Love is not the absence of conflict, y'all. Love is the presence of conflict with the courage, character, and commitment to find your way through. Okay? And I'll prove it to you. How many of you have had a personal relationship go bad? Okay. Wow, a bunch of liars in this room. I did this talk in Texas. You can imagine how I go over in Texas. But I mean, it's all right, I was in Austin. So I did this for all of Austin Unified. Right, all their teachers. And I asked that question. 2,000 teachers. 1,999 people raised their hand. One person lied. And this one woman was sitting right in the aisle, and the mics were set up down the aisle for Q&A. And she reaches over and grabs the mic and goes, "Yeah." And he's right there. And that was precisely my response. I was like, "Go ahead. This will be way more interesting than anything I have to say. Yeah. You want to see some trauma? Here it comes." So I'm talking about the one where you got your heart stomped out. I'm talking about the one that made you fundamentally doubt love, that relationship. Okay? After you got crushed, who paid for your pain? Oh, somebody came with it real quick. Right over here, right? This brother's raising his hand. He's like, "The next one." Okay? Apparently yours is fairly recent, right? You're still carrying that trauma out in your chest. The next one. Right? And those closest around you, and the reason for that is because the natural human instinct is to protect yourself. And love is perhaps the highest risk behavior one can engage in because there is absolutely no guarantee of protection, especially if we're talking about Pax love, if we're talking about unconditional love. And so when you went back into that next relationship, you didn't get to that relationship and be like, "I know we just met, but I really think we should get married right now." Okay? You went into that next relationship at arm's length. And if you are still in a relationship, okay, it is because that person gently pushed your arm down and said, "That's all right. That ain't me. And I know you're carrying some baggage, and we can unpack that piece by piece by piece until you learn to trust again." And then 6 months later, they're like, "And by the way, I got some baggage too. Can we get to that now?" Okay? That's love. Okay? Love, okay, is high-risk behavior. Okay? And so kids aren't just going to open their hearts back up to you. When the kids we're talking about here, the most vulnerable youth, they have had their hearts stomped out. And so they're coming in with you at arm's length. And you're like, "But I'm a teacher, and I care. And don't you understand why I'm in your community?" Okay? And they're like, "Man, I've heard all that before. Kill all that noise." And then we go to work on the head. And then we talk about the rules and the curriculum. And look, y'all, okay, the kids we're talking about here today, they ain't letting you in their head. That is the only safe place left when you've been crushed in love. You want to get to the head? Get to the heart. You win the heart to win the head. And we spend so much time in this technocratic conversation about how to get kids' heads geared up for these measurables that we're doing that we have lost track of the heart. And this is why the most hurt kids hurt kids. Hurt people, y'all, until we get to the healing. Third, is audacious hope, because what we're talking about here today, this conversation is about being audacious. Now, The way we try to do this is by thinking about our classroom, our program, our school as a micro ecosystem. Okay, what I have laid out to this point is a meta ecosystem. And all those things in the meta ecosystem, they are real. Racism is real. Poverty is real. Violence is real. Patriarchy is real. Homophobia is real. All these things are real. So they are coming into your school, like it or not. One teacher said to me, I will dig where I stand. And that is the language of the master gardener. The master gardener does not blame the seed for not growing. The master gardener understands it is my obligation to create the conditions in the soil so that every seed that I plant can grow. Now, the best description I've heard of this actually comes from a medical doctor, a black woman named Camera Jones, who's on the teaching faculty at Columbia University in New York. She tells a story called The Gardener's Tale, which she later wrote up and published in a medical journal. And she tells a story about how her and her husband had just bought a brownstone. She'd just been hired at Columbia. They bought a brownstone, and she's walking up the stairs for the first time, and she gets to the door, and she looks to the right, and underneath the window, she sees a flower box. And she turns to her husband and says, that should be our first project, because that's going to be the first thing that people see when they come to our house. And her husband, like any smart partner, says back, yes, dear. Yes, dear. Very few married people in this room. Okay? So that weekend they go to the gardening store. She buys a bag of soil and a packet of flower seeds, and she comes back and she's getting ready to put the soil into the flower box, and as she leans in, she realizes there's a partition splitting it in half. So she takes the soil and she puts it into the side that's empty, but on the other side there's already soil there, so she doesn't add any new soil. And then she takes the packet of seeds and she splits it in half, and she needs half the seeds into the new soil and half the seeds into the side that already had soil. And she says over the next several weeks and months, she paid particular attention to make sure both sides got plenty of water, plenty of light. She says what happened next was the most important medical discovery of her career. Because on the side with the fresh soil, all of the seeds grew to full height, vibrant colors. But on the side with the soil that was already there, she realized that that soil was old, and it was rocky, and it was devoid of some key nutrients. And she said the seeds on that side, only a few of them grew, and they only grew to middling height, and they crowded each other for space in the box. And she says, what I realized in that moment is how much place matters. That's how much you matter. It does not matter what your whole school is doing. You can dig where you stand. You can change the contents of the soil where those seeds come to grow with you. You can control that. That is within your locus of control. And that is ultimately the beginning and the deepest part of your responsibility. So if you're busy trying to do structural work, but the very soil on which you stand every day is toxic, then all that structural work will be for naught. Now, 22 years, young, I've been at this. And I have never had a perfect year. I have never had a perfect semester. I have never had a perfect unit. I have never had a perfect marking period. I have never had a perfect week. I have never had a perfect day. And I have never had a perfect class period. Not once. 22 years. But I wake up every day expecting to, knowing that I won't. And in order to do that, for 2+ decades, you've got to be audacious. But the system crushes audacious teachers. It punishes audacious teachers. It insists that we get in line with a morally suspect framework. So I encourage everybody in this room to bang on the system audaciously. Because ultimately, that is the greatest modeling that we can offer for kids. If we aren't willing to take those risks, we certainly can't ask them to. So I want to end by sharing somebody who I feel like her entire life models what I mean by critical hope. And that's Maya. And next to Maya, I have a picture of a book. It's from my colleague at San Francisco State, a brother named Sean Ginwright. And I have Sean's book up here in part because of the subtitle. And the subtitle, which you probably can't see from where you're sitting, in it he uses the term radical healing. I'm not talking about creating healing environments. Healing environments are a response to naturally hurtful things. I'm talking about creating radically healing environments because of the things that we're talking about happening in our kids' lives are radical, and they deserve a radical response. And I'm going to play for you right now an interview between Maya and Dave Chappelle. Okay? Yeah, you can piece that together in your own head, okay? Where I think she models precisely what I mean by radical healing.
John Singleton was doing his movie, Poetic Justice, and he asked, would I come out to Los Angeles and do a cameo? I walked out of my trailer that morning, and there was one young man cursing, like you could see the blue come out of his mouth. Ooh. And then he and another fellow, they were at each other's throats. They had each other's clothes. So I went up to one young man and I said, excuse me, may I speak to you? He said, I wouldn't give, I said, I understand that. But may I speak to you for a minute? He said, if these moves, I said, I've heard that before. But do you know how important you are? Do you know that our people slept, lay spoon fashion in the filthy hatches of slave ships, in their own and in each other's excrement and urine and menstrual flow, so that you could live 200 years later? Do you know that? Do you know that our people stood on auction blocks so that you could live? He said, I said, no, but I just wonder, when's the last time anyone told you how important you are? And he started the tears started to come out. I had no Kleenex or anything, so I just wiped his face with my hands and talked to him. And Miss Janet Jackson came. She said, Dr. Angelo, I don't believe you actually talked to Tupac Shakur. So I didn't know Tupac Shakur. I didn't know Six Pack. I had never heard the name. Because in my life and my age group, you understand, I didn't know that. Tupac's mother wrote me a letter. She said her son had called her right after I had spoken to him. And she wanted to thank me. She said, you may have saved his life. And I thank you, Dr. Angelo.
In that one story, she painted a more human picture of him than the entire media did during his career, you know. People were afraid of Tupac. The media made him like he was this scary thing. And she talked about him like he was a young man in a confusing and difficult situation. And that's kind of what I like about Dr. Angelo. Because I know I'm not perfect and whatever, but it's something that she can look at me and she can kind of put the picture together. She knows I'm just a dude trying to figure it out.
Each of us has a chance to be somebody. And it's my delight that you would ask for me so that I could have the pleasure, the joy, the thrill of talking to you so that I can be somebody.
For me, that's master pedagogy. Now, I just want to do a quick recap about that story she told. Okay, so, Maya Angelou is a Nobel Peace Prize nominee in literature, national treasure, a grandmother. And she is where when this happens? L.A., somebody said L.A. Okay? She's on a movie set, right? She ain't in my old neighborhood. She's on a movie set. And she walks out of her trailer on a movie set, a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, a grandmother, and she sees who about to fight? Okay, so I got Tupac from a couple people, I got two young men. No. It can't be Tupac because she says she doesn't even know who Tupac was. She didn't know Six Pack. Okay? But you see, that's what happens when we hear stories like this, is we do, oh yeah, I mean, she intervened in the life of Tupac. I mean, thank God, Maya, thanks a lot, because, you know, we needed Pac. The blood needed to be saved. No. Not in the lives of two young men. No way. No one comes out of a movie trailer and intervenes in the lives of two young men about to fight. No way in hell anybody does that. You come out of your trailer and you see two young men about to fight, you call security. Or go back in, she said. So whose life is she intervening in? Her own. She walks out, she sees these two young brothers about to fight. Those are her sons. If you have children, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because if you saw your son or daughter about to get into it, it wouldn't be no fucking calculus going off in your head about, wow, I wonder if I get in there if they'll hit me, or right? I wonder, is this a violation of my contract? It's immediate, right? Because those are your sons. You see, and that's what it comes down to, isn't it? Right? We do a whole calculus around these babies that we serve. Okay? And because we can't actually engage in a way where we see them as ourselves, we see them as our own sons, we rationalize why we don't intervene in their lives. Oh, and some casts do intervene. Because you see, Maya gets down there to intervene, right? She gets between the two brothers. And she's looking at Pac, and Pac does what? What's his reaction? He curses her out. Okay, hey, don't do that. Never ever curse out grandmas. Okay? But he curses her out. What's her reaction? Yeah, that's all right. You need to give me that right now? I can carry all that. I've heard all that before. But do you understand how important you are, my son? Do you understand how important you are to this community? Because you see, I see teachers try to intervene in kids' lives. And then the kids buck back because they don't know how to take that support, or they don't even think they want it. And the teacher's response is like, all right then, you figured it out yourself. Because I tried. But not when it's your son, is it? Your son bucks back, you come again, as Maya does. And what's Pac's reaction the second time? He curses her out again. And Maya goes again, I'm not leaving because you don't understand how important you are. I see the significance of this moment right now, and I'm going to stay here till it all gets locked in, or I'm going to die trying. That's transformative pedagogy. That's critical hope. When adults model that in kids' lives, they run through walls. Okay? And when they don't, when they engage in some calculus that is calculated in an institutional response, then kids know where things really stand. And those are the places where they won't really engage in the ways that we need them to. It's us, y'all. We're the X factor, not the kids. Why does it matter? Maya intervenes in Pac's life circa 1991. It's on the set of Poetic Justice. Okay? And because Maya does, Pac's own mother writes her a letter and says, thank you because you saved his life on that day. And because Maya musters the courage, character, and commitment to save Pac's life that day, Pac goes on to live 5 more years. Pac is murdered in the streets of Las Vegas in 1996. And if you study Tupac as an artist, as I do, what you will find is the period between 1991 and 1996, the 5 years that Maya bought him by coming off that trailer and intervening in his life, was the most productive artistic period of Pac's life. He wrote so much in those 5 years, they couldn't publish it all. This is why Pac has album after album after album coming out after he's dead. One of those albums that was written in those 5 years came out in 2003. And it is called Resurrection. And in 2009, my homie snapped this photo across the world in Kathmandu. And it is a picture of 3 brothers. The oldest one is standing in the middle, turned to the right, okay, consoling the middle brother, whose hand is on his head because he is weeping. And the baby brother on the left is watching, learning empathy. Now, what you might not catch is the shirt that the oldest brother is wearing. That is the album shirt from Resurrection. And this is the truth about our work. Okay? You don't know who your Tupac will be. You just don't know. Okay? But I promise you this. Okay? It is your Tupac. It is that kid that is the most likely to be able to speak to the other kids that are stuck in the concrete. To have a message that truly resonates in their heart, that makes them willing to open their head again. But the Tupacs are the ones we're the least likely to invest in because we think we're the messengers. We think we're the vessel. The hood will save the hood when we start investing in the hood. The governor, policy, the feds, they've never given a shit about my block. But you go on my block right now, and the D-boys, my cousin on the corner right now, okay, I see them, okay, as the change agents. If we can reconnect them in a real and viable way to see themselves in that way. Okay? Ultimately, okay, those are the classroom spaces, those are the school spaces that not only transform individual kids' lives, but change neighborhoods. Okay? And that's the gig that I think that we all signed up for. If I can be supportive in any way on your mission to do that kind of work, please do not hesitate to reach out. I will share any of this stuff that I share with you today or any other resources that we have access to, because this is not an East Oakland project. This is a global project for freedom and justice and autonomy for all young people. Thank you.